everyone, and welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to go over a bag. A bag that's good for everyone, but specifically a bag that's good for the men. Today, we're going over the Mighty Messenger bag, and this pattern comes to us from Fierce Kitten Studio. Now, I know, I said it's for the men in your life. It doesn't have to be for just men, okay? One of the questions I get asked all the time on my videos is, can you please help me find a pattern in a bag for my husband, my father, my son, my brother, the guys in my life? Because as much as I love color, they're not that into it. So this month, which is also the September Bag Making Bee Club box, this month we're making a bag that's good for everyone, but especially for the guys. So as you can see, this is just the classic messenger shape bag. We're using a nylon material on the exterior, and we're using a bit of vinyl as accents on the flap and also for holding the D-rings on the side. I'm not using any rivets at all this month. This bag is completely sewn, which gives it a very good look. And I'm gonna tell you, as somebody who usually likes to do rivets instead of sewing, it actually comes together perfectly and it's not challenging at all. So on the front of the bag, we have a flap. It has a magnetic snap closure. You open that up, and then we have a nice opening on the inside. We're using a waterproof canvas on the inside. On one side here, we have a tech pocket. Now this is a padded pocket. It's a slip pocket. It's great for small laptops, Kindles, e-readers, iPads, things like that. On the other side, we have a zip pocket, and then we have this adorable tag on the inside. It says, bruh. This tag comes with the September Bag Making Bee Club box. It is optional, obviously, but it is really fun. It's really fun, because we were thinking, we're like, this is a bruh bag. As my son would say, not a bro bag, it's a bruh bag. One of the coolest things about this pattern is this pocket right here. So this is a flap, but this is also a zipper pocket on the flap. It is such a cool accent. I will tell you, it is optional. So if you're somebody who's just like, I don't know if my pocket will look good and I don't want to, like, you know, have it look bad on the flap, it is completely optional. You could put this pocket on the lining if you wanted of the flap. Totally optional. You could put this pocket on the back panel. So the method that you use to install this pocket on the flap here, you can really use it anywhere else. But the really cool design of this bag, besides it being a beautiful and perfectly sized messenger bag, is that zipper pocket on the flap. So I do suggest you give it a try, but I completely understand if you're a little weary and you want to maybe just put it somewhere else for now. So thank you so much to Fierce Kitten Studio for allowing me to use your pattern on the channel. This is the first time we've done a pattern from them on the OklaRoots YouTube channel, and you guys, I love it. I think this is an older pattern. I've seen a lot of videos out for this one already, but this is a classic, guys. This is a classic shape, a classic structure. I really like it. In today's video, we're gonna play a little bit with our interfacing and our stabilizer. We're gonna play a little bit with where we put everything, how we do things, see if we can make some steps a little bit easier. I will tell you, for this one right here, this step was a little challenging for me when I made this bag specifically, because I put kind of a more firmer stabilizer on the exterior of the flap, which made this pocket. We're gonna talk a lot about that in the video today. So I'm gonna give you lots of tips to make this very structured, very professional, very, beautiful, but also pretty easy to put together. Thank you also to the Bag Making Bee Club for sponsoring today's video. If you don't know about it, the Bag Making Bee Club is a monthly subscription box. It's put together by Gabby over at Wonderground Studios, and there's a collection of us that get together and we discuss patterns, materials, colors. Jade over at the Heartwood and Hide always provides us with these amazing tags for the bag that are completely unique to the box. It's the only place you're gonna get them. It's a really fun project box. I know that it has grown in popularity immensely lately, and we couldn't be more excited and proud of our little baby. So I hope if you're part of the subscription, you love this bag this month. As we go into the holidays, this is gonna be a great go-to make, again, for anyone in your life that you're like, I really wanna make them a bag, but I don't know what they would like, because they're not into like the characters and the themey things. They don't like bright colors. I don't know what to make them. I know I have that problem, people in my life. And I'll tell you, when I made this bag, my husband, Derek, who is my biggest supporter and loves everything I do, he came up to me and he was asking about this bag, and he said, hey, when you make it again for the video, can I have that one? I have made bags for my husband, but he's never asked for them. I have made bags for him for traveling and things like that, which he uses and he loves, but he has never come up to me and said, hey, what you're making right now, can I have that? I was like floored. I was like, of course you can. So this is one of those bags for the people who are impossible to make things for. So if you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all, leave them down below. Go check out Fierce Kitten Studio. Go check out the other patterns. If there's another pattern you'd like to see featured on the channel, let me know. Because I am so hooked on this bag. I can't wait to make more. All right, guys, let's get started. So for this bag, you're gonna need at least 2/3 of a yard of exterior material. I'm using this bonded luxe nylon from Wonderground Fabrics, and this is in color olive, which gives it a very nice neutral look. The nice thing about this material too is that it has kind of like a fleecy backing on it, so I don't have to add any interfacing because it won't stretch, it won't fray, that's great. But you could also just avoid stabilizer too if you want more of a loose bag. However, I'm gonna be adding different stabilizers today. Then you're gonna need about a 12" by 12" cut scrap material. This needs to be a vinyl or raw edge material. This is going to be for the strap connector. This is also gonna be for the flap contrast. You're gonna need at least 1.5 yards of lining material. I'm using a waterproof canvas because again, don't have to interface it, doesn't stretch, doesn't fray, very easy to work with. And this is also gonna add some extra structure to my bag without having to add more stabilizer. Next, I'm gonna be using a stick and sew interfacing. Now this is kind of like a fleece interfacing and it has just a sticky back on it. So instead of having to fuse it with an iron, I can just stick it on. I am gonna be trimming this down. I'm gonna show you how I do that. But I'm only using this on the flap. The pattern really wants you to use something like this everywhere, but I'm gonna use foam instead, and I really like the way this turns out. So I'm only using this on this flap, and it gives great structure to the flap. Next, I have my foam interfacing. I would have about a yard of that or so, because again, I am gonna be using the foam everywhere else. So the front, the back, the gusset, the body of the bag is going to be made with the foam. And I just want to say, if you're using foam, I know a lot of people get a little nervous about foam because it does look so thick. However, it's mostly air, so it's very easy to sew over. Don't let this thickness make you think that it's dense. It's not. I would say, honestly, layers of this foam are easier to sew over versus layers of like this fleece or a Decoville or anything like that. So don't shy away from foam. Foam is actually a really good secret weapon when it comes to bags because it's easy to sew, but it adds a lot of structure. All right, here are the hardware and accessories. You're gonna have 2 zippers. Each needs to be at least 8 inches long. I'm using number 5 zippers, and each one is going to need a zipper pull. I'm going to be using webbing for my strap today instead of building my own. So this is about 54 to 60 inches long of webbing. This is 1.5 inch wide, so the hardware I have to go with it is also 1.5 inches wide. So I have 2 swivel hooks and a strap slider. Then I have 2 1.5 inch wide D-rings that are gonna be attached to the side of the bag. I also have a magnetic snap. This is going to go with the flap, and then our awesome bag tag, which I think is so fun. You can put this on the outside, the inside, wherever you want. I'll show you where I like to put it, but have fun with this one. This is a really cute one. Okay, so here's most of the other stuff. For the thread that will be threaded through the needle of the machine, this is a Tex 45 weight thread. It is a nice thick polyester thread. This is going to look very nice on the top stitching. For the bobbin though, I like to use a thinner thread, so this is a Gutermann thread. This is from Joann's. My needle of choice for this project is a Microtex 8012. This is going to be a perfect size for the material I'm using today. I would not go thinner than that. However, if you are worried about bulky layers in your machine, you could go up to a 90 needle. I have some paper tape to help hold things down from the top, and then I have some double-sided tape to help hold things down from the back. I have my bag tag as always, an air erasing marker and a silver ink pen, a 1 inch by 6 inch ruler, a seam ripper and stiletto. A turning tool is always really helpful. And then I'm gonna be using this little inner seam tool here. This is just gonna help me trim down that fleece for the flap because I don't want that sticky fleece in the seams. This is what I'm going to use to help trim it down so I know it will not be in the seam allowance. So let's go over our pattern pieces. First, we have the flap. The flap is going to be an exterior material cut, and it's going to be a lining material cut, and then your stabilizer of choice. I like the stick and sew, but I am going to trim this down. You can see I put some marks on the back, but I haven't trimmed it down yet. I'm going to show you how I do that with the tool. Anything that is a quilt cotton or a frayable stretchy material needs to be interfaced with a woven interfacing to prevent stretching, to prevent fraying. Otherwise, if you're using material that just doesn't have that problem, you're in good shape. Next up, we have the main body. You're gonna have 2 cuts of your lining for this, 2 cuts of your exterior, and if you choose, 2 cuts of foam. If you don't want to do foam on everything, but you still want it to have that tech pocket. So that's like a padded pocket on the inside of the bag to protect electronics. You will need at least 1 cut of foam. However, I'm gonna try something today. I did not do this on the first bag, but I'm gonna try it today. We're gonna put foam on the front and the back and the gusset for like ultimate structure. Next, we have our upper gusset. You're gonna have 2 cuts of your exterior material. So for me, it's that nylon, and then 2 cuts of your lining material for that. And then for your exterior lower gusset, you're gonna have 2 cuts of your exterior material. And then for your lining, you're just gonna have this 1 cut. It is a different size, and this is for your lining material. If you wanna add any sort of fleece to the exterior, go ahead and do that. But again, we're gonna be using foam. You can do fleece and foam for superstructure, but we're just gonna be doing foam. Next, we have our electronics slip pocket. This is gonna be your lining material, and then you're gonna have a smaller cut of foam. It is important that if you do want this to be electronics, you do have the foam. It's gonna protect it from getting damaged, you know. It just keeps fragile things from breaking. Next up, we have our exterior zip pocket. This is the one on the bottom here. It's the longer one. This is the one that goes on the flap, and then you have your interior zip pocket. This is one that's gonna go on the lining. I would say the exterior one is optional. So I know that zipper can be a little tricky on the flap, and it's very prominent. And if you're just like, man, I really don't think I'm gonna be able to make that look good, I don't wanna make that zipper pocket, you can totally leave off the flap zipper pocket. The design is amazing with it. However, it also would look really good without it. So that's just my 2 cents on that. I'm gonna be showing you how to do the pocket though. But the lining zipper pocket, you're definitely gonna want, because that's how we turn the bag out later. Okay, the last few pieces, we have the strap contrast. This is little contrast vinyl that goes on the bottom of the flap. It is optional. I don't suggest you skip it. You really need to add this. It is a beautiful contrast. It ties the bag in really nice. And the vinyl we're using today is so nice. And then we're gonna have 2 cuts of the vinyl as well. This is going to be for the D-rings on the side. The material we're using is not super bulky. It is very easy to sew over. I'm gonna walk you through it. And then finally, we have the last piece of foam, and this is for the gusset. So if when we were looking at the gusset pieces, you were like, where's the stabilizer? Where's the foam? It's just one large piece here, and it's going to be for the entire gusset. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to show you how I trim down this fleece. The seam allowance throughout the pattern is about 1/2 inch, and so I want to make this 1/2 inch shorter on all the sides. Now this is easy enough to do on the straight edges. You can just use a ruler and you see, just draw a straight line, use your rotary cutter, do that. It's just on the curves, sometimes it can be a little tricky because this curve right here, when you bring it in 1/2 inch, it's not the same. It's a different curve. So if you had like a circle, it would be a different size circle. It would not be the same. So to help me with that, I have this little tool here. Oh, it's hard to see on the white, isn't it? But I have this little inner seam tool here, and it's got all these different markings. But when I'm specifically interested in a curve, I have a 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and 1/2 inch mark. I'm gonna look at the 1/2 inch mark. There's like a little dot right here. And I'm gonna line up the edge, the rounded edge of my tool with the rounded edge of my panel. I'm gonna put my pen in that 1/2 inch hole, and I'm just going to trace around this curve. It doesn't have to be neat, it doesn't have to be pretty. I'm just trying to transfer the 1/2 inch mark. Now, it's very, very simple. You see, there it is. Very, very simple to do. I mean, this is a very small curve. This is especially handy though when you have like bigger curves or, you know, wider curves or just some weird shapes. It's gonna help you with that. So there we go. Now you could also just eyeball it, but I just want to show you how I use that tool. So now using your rotary cutter or your scissors, you can trim down the 1/2 inch around all of this. Now I will tell you that sewing over this fleece is not bad. I did sew over the sticky fleece quite a bit whenever I was making the first bag, but we're gonna actually try not to do that today. But if you do have to sew over it, you'll be fine. I found it did not gum up my needle. It was not super sticky, it didn't cause any problems. But I just prefer this stuff to be out of the seams. And save this little cut off piece because this is gonna be handy when we're working with the magnetic snap. So when I first made this, I attached this fleece to the exterior. And I will tell you, it was very difficult to make that front pocket with this material attached to the exterior and using the material we're using with the nylon and the water resistant canvas. It was hard to get it to be squared up the way I wanted it. So today, I'm gonna add the fleece to the lining of the flap. And so to make sure I have it where I want it, I'm gonna use a small ruler, and I'm just gonna mark little 1/2-inch lines on all 4 edges. It doesn't have to be across the entire edge, just enough so you can line this up. I'm actually gonna go up here to the corners and specifically mark the corners. And if you also wanna work on the rounded corners on the bottom to make sure the fleece goes exactly where you want it, you can do that. Might use my little tool for that as well. Just kind of mark like that. So now it's 1/2 inch in. Okay, and I actually might start at the bottom. I think I'm gonna start, because I'm more concerned with making sure the bottom of the flap looks good than I am the top. The top's gonna be sewn into the bag, so I'm gonna focus on the bottom. So I'm taking the paper off the curved bottom edge of my fleece, carefully. Just gonna fold the paper back a bit. And then I'm gonna line up my fleece with my marks, and then just slowly remove the paper and adjust your material so it stays centered in the marks. And if you got them lifted up, move it around, go ahead and do that. This is also nice because if it's not totally perfect, it's the lining side, so we can finagle it and not have to worry about the end result too much. All right, then just gently push it down. You need to see, like I have some bubbling here. I can just lift this up. And see, it's already starting to stick a lot. And then I can gently just smooth it out. All right, so get this nice and smooth the way you want it. And there you go. You have your fleece attached to your lining. You can set this to the side. All right, so now we're gonna work on installing the magnetic snap in the flap. To do that, mark a dot using the pattern piece. So on the pattern piece, there'll be a little marking for the magnetic snap. Use that to mark placement here. Once you have that dot marked, and I'll show you to mark that dot, you see how you have like 1/2 of a circle and then this little tiny dot there. You're gonna line up your pattern piece on the left side of your lining panel and just mark a dot where that small circle is. Then grab the washer for the male part of the magnetic snap, and the male part is the thinner part. Using that washer, center it over that dot, and then draw in the 2 slits, and that's gonna be placement for the prongs for your snap. Now grab your seam ripper and very, very gently seam rip through only where those marks are. And what's actually nice is having that fleece on the back of this is gonna add that extra stabilizer that we really need with magnetic snaps. So you're seam ripping through both layers of material here. Then grab your male snap and insert the prongs into those 2 slits. Flip this over. You can add another piece of stabilizer here if you'd like before you add the washer, just for extra durability, but with my little fleece cut here, I'm fine. And then we're gonna add the washer over the back. I'm gonna push the prongs in on one another, but you can push them in or out. And then I'm gonna grab some of that extra that I had from my fleece, and just a little cut of it, and I'm gonna use that to cover the back of that snap, so that way this doesn't rub against the exterior material and create a hole or anything. All right, now your lining part of your flap is prepped. You can set this to the side. Now grab your exterior flap cut and then your contrast piece F. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna lay them both right side up, and we're just gonna lay that contrasting piece right over the bottom curved edge of the flap, just like that. Now, depending on your material, this stuff can move around and it can be a little difficult to sew down because of that. So I'm gonna add some double-sided tape to the back of my contrast piece here, just to make sure it doesn't move while I'm sewing it. But I am making sure my double-sided tape is not in the seams, not because there's a problem with it. I just don't like to add extra sticky stuff when I don't have to. So now I'm gonna remove the paper from my tape, just like that. And then I'm gonna lay my contrasting piece right side up on the right side of the bottom of the exterior flap panel, lining up the bottom edges. And if it's not totally perfect on these edges, remember we have like a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're gonna be okay. The one thing you wanna double check is that this is straight. If this is all wonky, go back, double check. You want this to be as straight as possible. So now I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm gonna top stitch along the top edge, and then I'm gonna baste around the sides and the bottom, all at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I do find that although this vinyl here is very soft and has a matte feel, it can kind of stick to my metal presser foot. So I'm gonna be using a non-stick foot with this With this specific vinyl, if you don't have a nonstick foot on your machine, you can always just grab a piece of just regular tape and put that on the bottom of your presser foot. I just wanted to make note of that for some reason, maybe it's just me, but for some reason my metal presser foot always sticks to this beautiful vinyl, and it's one of my favorite vinyls to work with. So I'm gonna go top stitch this all down now. All right, so now on this little contrast piece is where I like to put my bag tag. You can put nothing there. You can put a bag tag. You can put the bruh tag. I like to put it there. So I'm gonna add some double-sided tape to the back of my sew on bag tag. If you had a metal bag tag, you could also add this here. And what I'm gonna do is fold this in half and find the midpoint on the top edge of my contrasting piece here. And I'm gonna use a vinyl pen to mark that, but only on the vinyl section so I can easily wipe it off. Then I'm gonna measure 1 inch down from the top edge of the contrast, and I'm going to use that midpoint mark to center my tag, and that's just where I like to put it. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch around all 4 edges of my tag at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, I'm going to set this to the side for just a moment. Now we're going to work on the zipper pocket that's in that flap. Now this is a little tricky. If you are not comfortable with this type of pocket, you can definitely skip it. I just want to put it out there. I love the look of the pocket. I think you should definitely do it. However, it is very noticeable. And if you're like, there's no way I'm gonna make that look good because those pockets are hard, there are other options to pockets, or you can just skip it and it's still gonna be a beautiful, beautiful bag. So now we're gonna take the lining piece for the exterior zipper pocket and we're gonna fold it in half, finding the midpoints along the long edges. So the pattern suggests pressing this, but with the material I'm using, it's gonna be easier if I mark it. So I'm going to just cut along the edges, marking the midpoint. So now we're going to take this and fold this in half so the short edges come together and the material is wrong sides together. And we're just going to press right along that fold. This should also be where your marks are. And I'm going to open this up, and if you lose this crease or you just can't see it very well, you can grab a ruler and just connect your 2 midpoint marks and just use an air erasing marker to mark that line, which is what I'm going to do. Okay, so the pattern says to mark 1/2 inch below that center mark. So this is my center mark right here, the crease. We're on the wrong side of the lining panel. I'm gonna do below as into the right because this is a side facing pocket. It's not an up down pocket, it's a side pocket. So I marked a line that's 1/2 inch to the right of that midpoint line. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold this in half, matching up midpoint to midpoint with the wrong side facing out. And all I'm trying to do right now is find the middle of my marks. So I'm just folding it in half to find the very center of my panel. There we go. Okay, now using that midpoint mark, I'm going to draw a rectangle that is 7 inches wide and 1/2 inch tall. And the leftmost part of that pocket is this second line over here on the right. I feel like I worded that in a way that was more complicated than necessary, but pretty much what you're making is a 7 inch tall by 1/2 inch wide rectangle that is 1/2 inch to the right of your midpoint line. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now take this once again and fold it in half, just like you did previously with it wrong sides together, lining up those short edges. Try to make sure you keep it nice and folded because this crease right here is what we're gonna be using to line it up with the flap. So now grab your flap panel and we're going to lay our pocket just like this, where the folded edges on the left, the 2 short raw edges on the right. This is the right side of the material, okay? When lining this up, this folded edge here is going to be 1 1/4 inch away from the left edge of your pocket, and the bottom edge of this lining panel is going to be 1/2 inch up from the top of the contrasting. So just work on this one at a time. So this is gonna be easiest to do if you use a ruler. Now I'm blurring out the numbers obviously because I don't need you to have the measurements. But if you use a ruler and just line it up on the side of your flap at the 1 1/2 inch mark and then line up the bottom edge of your lining at the 1/2 inch mark, that's gonna be the easiest way to do this. All right, I know this is tricky. So now once you have that lined up, you're going to open up the lining so that you can see your rectangle, grab some tape, and let's tape this down. If you have material that you can pin, you can go ahead and pin that. Just do your very best here to make sure it's straight. So the best way to do that is to check this bottom edge of your lining and make sure that it's completely straight and 1/2 inch all the way along up from that contrast. And I just like to use tape on the sides to hold it all down. Don't want it going anywhere. And now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew right over that 7" by 1/2 inch rectangle, making sure the needle gets into every single corner. I am decreasing my stitch length down to a 2mm stitch length. The smaller the stitch length, the better with these types of pockets. All right, so I have it sewn down. You can see it's nice and stuck to my flap panel now. Now I'm gonna grab a ruler and I'm going to measure 1/4 inch up from one of the long edges of my stitching to mark a center. And this is allowing me to mark a midpoint line running down this pocket. And then you can draw diagonal lines going from the corner of that pocket down to meet that midpoint line. And then grab your seam ripper and start ripping right along that midpoint line. You are ripping through the lining that you sewed through, just the one panel here, not the one on the left, and you're ripping through your exterior panel as well. Once you get a little bit of it ripped, you can then grab your scissors and continue cutting along that center line until you get to the tip of the triangle you made on one side and then go off on the diagonal. Now here's the secret to these pockets. You gotta cut right up into the thread, like right into the corner without cutting the thread. And I know you're gonna cut, if you're new to this, you're gonna cut what you think is really close and it's not close enough, I promise. The tip of your scissors that's not sharp, the very rounded bit of your scissors should like be touching the thread. Not cutting it, but it should be touching it. That's how close you gotta get, or else you're gonna have a pinched pocket. And even then, it depends on your material. I'll probably still have a pinched pocket. This is not a pocket design that I am the best at, but with all things, practice is gonna make you better. Okay, now the hard part. We're gonna push the lining material through that opening to the back side. So see, when you do that, it should look something like this. You still have this one piece hanging off the left, and you have the piece behind it on the right. Let's flip it over. And this is where the material gets a little challenging. This is why I say this is not a beginner box this month. If you're using quilt cotton, this can still be a beginner pattern. But if you're using this material, it's a little bit more challenging because it doesn't want to lay flat. So we have to get creative with how we get this as flat as possible because we can't use clips here when we sew this down. So I'm just finger pressing right now. I'm rolling out the material along the straight edges and I'm pressing it down. And you can see if you had that sticky fleece on the back here, it's even harder because it's very thick then. I'm gonna flip this back out. I'm just very carefully doing this and I'm giving it a really good finger press. If you want to grab an iron, you can definitely do that. If you're gonna iron the nylon, I would suggest putting a piece of quilt cotton over the material first and then putting the iron over the quilt cotton. I don't like my iron to directly touch nylon. I don't know if it's supposed to or not, but I don't like it. So I wouldn't suggest it. But there we go. Actually, this is actually doing really well. When I had the sticky fleece on the first one, it was not staying flat. But I think this is actually gonna be okay. You just gotta give it a really good press. And if you don't have one of these, I suggest you look into it. Wonderground Fabrics has these. And it's a seam roller. And its purpose is for this, especially if you don't have a whole lot of dexterity and strength in your hands. This is weighted as a nice heavy weight to it. And all you have to do is just push it down and roll it. It requires a lot less work with your fingers and a lot less strength in your hand. If you just roll it over and it gets it nice and flat. I mean, you see that? It flattens it out really nice. You gotta be careful. My goodness. My material shifted and it flattened it out real good. Nice and flat. There we go. So you can see this still isn't perfect, but look at those corners. Those corners are looking pretty good. I got a little kiss right here. But like those are some of the nicest looking corners I've ever done on a pocket like this. My problem is always getting this to be like super straight. It's just because of the way the material is, but we'll deal with that in a minute. All right, so now grab one of your zippers and install the zipper pull if you haven't already. And I'm gonna grab a lighter and just melt down the edges of my zipper tape because it is fraying and I was very messy when I cut it. So I'm just gonna melt that down. Now I'm gonna grab some double-sided tape and I'm gonna add the double-sided tape along both long edges of my zipper tape. So this is on the right side of the zipper tape, right along the edge. I mean, like right on the edge. Don't let it get too close to the teeth. We don't want this tape to be seen in the end. So we're just gonna put it right along the edge and do this for both long edges of your tape. Okay, so now what we pretty much wanna do is just tape this window over our zipper, just like that. Now it can be a little tricky, so I'm gonna flip this over to the lining side. And you know what? I'm gonna press it on the lining side too. So I'm gonna grab my little handy dandy press here and give it a good press everywhere. If you're noticing that the material you're using is just rolling up a ton and it will not stay down and an iron doesn't help and the pressing doesn't help, you can use tape. That's what I did when I had the fleece on this one. And you can actually lift this up and use your double-sided tape and just tape down this seam and then tape down the lining back as well. And that will help keep it flat. But with these types of pockets, you just don't want a lot of bulk. That's the secret. The bulkier the material, the harder this pocket's gonna be. Okay, so looking at my flap, I'm looking at the wrong side. My lining is right side up. This is the top of the flap. The rounded bit is on the bottom. I have my zipper here, and when my zipper closes, I want my zipper to be going up towards the top. So I took the tape off of the left side of the zipper when the zipper's facing right side up. When I flip it over, that's now on the right side. And I'm gonna line this up so it's centered over that window and its short edges are matching up with the long edges of my lining. Because that's another thing, you don't want to miss this. Now, I am taping it down, but I'm probably going to adjust it. I just need to know where this is right here, okay? So now I'm going to flip this back over and look at the right side. And I'm going to look at the right side of my exterior. Now, see how my zipper is a little wavy? I don't want that. So I'm going to just start lifting it up and moving this around so that the zipper teeth are going right down the center of that opening. The chance that this will be perfectly straight when I'm done is very low. I always make kind of wonky zippers, and I'm okay with that. But do your best here. Take your time to straighten it out the way you want it, flatten it out. So once I'm good with that left side that I taped down, I'm gonna lift up all my material, and I still have the tape over here on the right. I'm gonna pull the paper off of that. Push your zipper pull away from the tape and then flip your material back down. And now let's work on taping down the right side. And if you need to kind of roll in the lining so it's not peeking out, you can do that. I find my lining always peeks out a little bit. So I just add that as a design feature. All right, once you're happy with how this looks, now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch right outside this window at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go slow, use a stiletto, use a zipper foot. Just do your best here. It's tricky. It's a tricky pocket. It just is. There's no other secret besides that. It's just tricky. All right, that actually looks pretty good. For me, that looks pretty good. And if you're worried about, like, you see the wrinkling, once this is all sewn and the bag is done, it's gonna be much cleaner. I can tell you, when I did this pocket on the first bag, I was very worried by this point because it was looking rough. But in the end, it ended up looking amazing because the bag curves, it helps pull, it looks great. So don't worry if it's not perfect yet. Okay, so now let's flip this over to the back. Fold your lining in half so that these short edges come together, just like that. Grab your clover clips, which I forgot to mention in the beginning of the video, and clip along the long edges. So you do notice the pocket hangs off the side. I think it's supposed to. But I'm just clipping both long edges of the lining. You might find this easier if you flip it so that the exterior is right side up, and then you fold the exterior down and out of the way. Make sure you clip it to the zipper as well. Get everything flattened out. Now I'm going to flip up the bottom of my flap, and I'm going to clip the bottom edge of my lining. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew along these two clipped edges. You're going to sew it with the exterior right side up and then folding the exterior out of the way. And just go along the sides, back stitching at the beginning and the end, anywhere between 1/4 of an inch to a 3/8 inch seam allowance, whatever's easiest. I do suggest you use a zipper foot for this. Okay, so once you have this sewn on the long edges, I'm going to flip this flap exterior wrong side up, keeping this nice and flat. I'm going to go baste along the right side of my flap here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just holding that pocket in place on the right. The pocket will be in the seam. If that's too much bulk for you, you can trim about 1.5 inches off this edge here. You can just trim it down by 1.5 inches and then close the pocket if that's what you prefer. I do like the pocket being in the seam because I feel like it helps hold it in place, but that's totally up to you. So I'm just gonna go baste this down to hold it there. And once that's basted down, I'm just going to trim off the excess of that lining. Again, you shouldn't have to worry too much about the bulk if you're using this material. So now have your exterior and lining panels and lay them right sides together. Grab some clips and let's clip along the sides and the bottom Okay, once you have the sides and the bottom clipped, we're going to sew along the sides and the curves on the bottom and the bottom edge. Add a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. You are not going to sew along the straight edge on the top. You're just going to sew along the sides and the bottom, all at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, if you're using really thick material, you might want to do a second round of stitching, just a little bit outside of that first round. My material's fine, I don't have to do that. So now I'm going to trim down the corners on the top at a 45-degree angle to reduce bulk. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim the seam allowance in half. Okay, and then on these bottom curves here, I'm just going to clip little tiny cuts into the corners. And I'm not getting that close to the stitching. I'm more than 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching. But I want this to be able to spread out and look nice and neat. So just little tiny clips around the curvy parts. Now we're gonna turn the flap right side out. And take your time here to really push out the corners and the seams. Yeah, and I really like that I used that sticky fleece on the lining. I think it still gives the flap a lot of structure and it's really nice, but I don't have to worry about it on the exterior, which is nice. So now I'm gonna go around pushing out the seams and kind of rounding them out so that they're the way I want them. And then I'm gonna add clips to the seams. I'm essentially just flattening the flap. If you're using other material that you can iron to do this, go ahead and do that. Personally, I just find that this is easiest. And I like to start at the bottom and work my way up the sides. And then just spend extra time on these corners. If you feel like they're a little jagged, you can spread them a little bit more with your finger. You can clip into them a little bit more. Key to all this is just take your time. If you try to rush through a lot of this, it's gonna look like you tried to rush through it and you're not gonna be happy with the results. So just take your time. Don't be in a hurry to finish this. So you see how I kind of push down and flatten out the material with my hands. And then I just like roll out the seam. Ideally, I'm rolling it so that the lining doesn't peek through. Sometimes it does, and that's okay. But that's the goal right now, is that when I roll this out, the lining isn't kind of rolling up to the exterior side. All right, once you have the seams the way you want them, then you can also clip along the top edge, because we're gonna close that as well. If you haven't added a bag tag and you have like a metal tag, a handmade one or something like that, and you wanna add that, make sure you do that before you close this all up if you wanted to add it onto the flap. So now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine, and along the sides and the bottom, we're gonna top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and along the top edge, we're gonna baste it at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can do 1/8 of an inch all around if you want, that's fine too. If you're using the same material that I'm using, you're gonna have some thickness differences, specifically when you get down on the bottom contrast. I do suggest that you increase the tension of your sewing machine. So the tension on my sewing machine is like, on my Bernina, it's like 5.5. I'm gonna increase it to 6.5. Because I do find that when it goes over these bulky bits, you get the loops on the lining side, and I don't like that. Just go very slow, take your time, top stitch. It's gonna look beautiful. All right, the flap is all done. You can set it to the side. So now I'm gonna grab my exterior front and back, and then my foam front and back panels, and I'm going to lay the exterior panel right side up over the foam, just like this. And I'm gonna use clips to clip around all the edges to hold it in place. And I'm gonna do this for both the front and the back panel. Now I'm gonna take both of these panels to the sewing machine, and I'm going to baste around all the edges of each panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. This is just holding the foam in place to these exterior panels. So now grab your front main panel, if you have one that is specifically gonna be used as the front, and then grab the template for that main panel and lay it on the right side of your main panel, just like this. And then using the mark on the main panel, mark placement for the female snap. So I'm just marking a dot right at the center of that placement mark right there. And now you're gonna grab the female part of that magnetic snap, use the washer to center it over that dot you just marked, and then mark placement for the prongs. And before you do this, you might want to just grab your flap, and I just kind of lift it up and see where my male snap is. And I'm just centering it over that dot with a just mark to make sure that it looks center on the panel. See how it's the same amount on each side? That looks good. If it's like this or something, catch that problem now before you start cutting things. So now I'm gonna grab my seam ripper. I'm gonna carefully seam rip through those 2 slit marks. Very, very carefully. Don't extend past them. And I'm cutting through the material, the exterior material, and I'm cutting through this foam as well, if you're using foam. So now I'm gonna insert the female snap through those slits, just like that. Flip it to the back. Since I already have a stabilizer on the back, which is my foam, I don't have to add anything between this and the washer. So I'm just gonna slide my washer on. I'm gonna press the prongs in on one another, just like that. Once again, I'm gonna grab some of that little scrap from my fleece, and I'm going to take the paper off the back because it's nice and sticky, and I'm just gonna place that right over the prongs so that it's nice and secure and safe. Super easy. So now you can grab your flap and just make sure it all looks right. That's looking good. All right, you can set this to the side for just a moment. Now you're gonna grab your 2 upper gussets and your 2 lower gussets. And this is something I noticed that it kind of looks different in real life than it does on the pattern, which threw me for a loop. The lower gussets are taller. So you see the one on the right here, these are the upper gussets. This is the lower gusset per the pattern pieces. On the diagram, it looks like it's the opposite. So don't let that throw you. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. It's gonna look good either way, but it looks really good if you do it the right way. Okay, so take your 2 lower gusset pieces, which are the 2 longer pieces, and we're going to lay them right sides together, lining up their bottom edges. So if you have a directional print here, the direction in the top is here, the bottom is here. You're going to lay them right sides together so the bottoms are at the same spot and the tops are at the same spot. And we're going to clip the bottom edges together along that short edge, right sides together. Now you're going to sew along the short edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Now open this up and press open the seam on the back. I'm just going to give it a finger press. I'm also going to try out my handy dandy tool here because I have it and it's pretty. Now I'm going to look at the right side of the exterior, press that down as well. And now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along both edges of that seam at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and this is just holding that seam pressed open. So now the bottom part of the gusset is done. So now we're going to take each of the upper gusset pieces and we're going to lay them right sides together, short sides together on each side of this long bottom gusset here and clip them together. Now this would be really cool if you had a bunch of different, colors of material. I think that would be a really fun accent, but even using the same color like we're doing now with the top stitching, it gives it a really, really cool look. You don't always have to use a bunch of different colors to show contrast. So now we're going to sew along these 2 clipped edges at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have those sewn on, now you can press the seams so that they're behind the upper panels, just like this. You see it? It's like that. That is going to be a little bit more bulk when you're sewing it to the panel. Or you can press the seam open, just like we did on the bottom here. I pressed the seam open on the first bag and I really like the way it looks, so I'm going to do that for these as well. I'm going to press both of these seams open and I'm going to top stitch on both sides of the seam at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, just like I did on this bottom seam. Okay, so now grab the foam for the gusset and let's mark the midpoint on the foam, just so we can easily line this up. Now the pattern says there should be like a 1/2 inch space on the top edge between the foam and the exterior panel, but the numbers don't quite add up for that, so we might have to trim this down. So lay your gusset, it's hard to see it all, lay your gusset, try to put it all in the frame, you can't see it. Lay your gusset so it's wrong side up, and then lay your foam on the wrong side of your gusset. Match up the middle of the gusset with the midpoints on the foam, just like that, and then extend. Now, the pattern says that you should have a 1/2 inch overhang on both short edges here. I don't have that, so I'm going to trim it down. So I just used a ruler to measure in a 1/2 inch from the exterior material, not a 1/2 inch from the foam, but a 1/2 inch from the exterior material, and then I marked a line on the foam, and that's just where I need to cut. All right, once you have it the size you need it, once again, line this up so it's centered on the back of your exterior gusset. I'm gonna use clips to hold it in place, and you should have a 1/2 inch gap on the short edges, so the foam is a 1/2 inch shorter on each top edge than the exterior. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're just going to baste along the 2 long edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and this is gonna hold the foam in place to the gusset. Okay, so now we're gonna do the strap connectors. And if you have experience with this, you might be like, no, not those kind. This actually is pretty easy because they're nice and large and the material is really nice. So trust me, this is an easier strap connector than when we've done it with thicker material. So these strap connectors are going to be easiest if you use double-sided tape, quite a bit of it. So I drew a midpoint line on the wrong side of my strap connectors going along the long edges. And now I'm gonna grab some double-sided tape and I'm gonna add double-sided tape right above and right below each of these midpoint lines. So you want to make sure this is tape you can easily sew over. You won't be sewing over a lot of it, but you will be sewing over some of it. Now remove the paper from your tape and then fold the long raw edges back, wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line, and the tape should hold it in place. So do this for both of your strap connectors. So this is what your strap connector should look like. On the front, it's nice and clean. On the back, you have those raw edges meeting in the center. Grab some more double-sided tape, and you're just gonna make little like 1-inch cuts and put them right over the short edges on the wrong side, so on the back side of each of these connectors. This is what it should look like. So what I like to do is I like to just take this, and with the paper still on the tape, I'm just gonna fold this in half to kind of get an idea of where the middle is here, and that fold will be enough. So then I'm going to thread one of my D-rings onto the strap connector, and the flat part of the D-ring goes against the back side of the strap connector. I'm going to take the paper off of one of those pieces of double-sided tape, and I'm going to fold that short raw edge back, wrong sides together on the strap connector to meet that midpoint fold. It does not have to be exact. Okay, if it's not exactly in the middle, that's okay. So this is what it looks like right now. You see I have the top folded down, wrapped around the D-ring just like that. On the front, this is what it looks like. I still have this raw edge on the bottom, but now I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. I'm going to remove the paper from the tape, and I'm going to fold the strap connector up to meet the other raw edge. Okay, so you see how they just meet on the back? That's the goal. They meet up with one another just like that. So when I look on the right side, I see no raw edges, and I look on the back, I just have this little bit here. Now I'm also going to grab some more double-sided tape because I'll need this in just a minute, and I'm going to add this double-sided tape right along the center of the back of this connector, just like that. If you're worried about this kind of coming undone, grab some clips and just clip along the side for now, and then we'll take those off when we sew this on. So I'm just going to clip along the side. So you see this is the back side. I have my tape, the raw edges. This is the right side, nice and clean. Repeat that with the other connector and D-ring. Okay, so now we have both of our strap connectors prepped, and we gotta sew them on to our gusset. You can do this. This looks harder than it is. First thing I'm gonna do is find the midpoint on the short edges of my gusset. And I'm doing that by just folding it in half and cutting a teeny tiny clip into the raw edge. Okay, so I'm using a chalk marker for this line because the air erasing marker does not air erase off of the nylon for some reason. I haven't tried getting it wet, but it does not air erase, so be careful with that. So I have a chalk marker, but I marked 1.5 inches down from the short edge and drew a horizontal line. And then using my air erasing marker, I just made little tiny marks here, 3/4 of an inch to the left and 3/4 of an inch to the right of that midpoint. So this gives me a 1.5 inch wide space that's centered. So all I have to do is match up my D-ring with that. It's gonna be nice and easy. So I'm gonna remove the clips from the side of my strap connector, and I'm gonna remove the paper from the tape. And I'm just going to line up so that the top edge where my D-ring is, that top folded edge is gonna line up with that chalk mark, and the sides of my connector are gonna match up with that 1.5 inch wide opening right here. And I'm just gonna tape it in place, and I'm looking at it to make sure it's not cockeyed. Now, you know me, everything's a little crooked. So it looks good now, but it will probably be a little crooked in a minute. So now I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine, and I'm gonna use a zipper foot for this. I'm gonna sew as close as I can right underneath that straight bar of the D-ring. And then I'm gonna sew around the edges all at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm top stitching here. If you want, you can add rivets. There's not rivets in the box, so I'm not adding them. Instead, what I'm gonna do after I have the outer part of this rectangle top stitched, Then I'm gonna mark diagonal lines to make an X in that stitching box. And I'm gonna top stitch over that X as well. And this is gonna allow me to go over the top and the bottom of the strap connector a second time, which is just gonna reinforce it. But I'm just gonna go top stitch around this with an X in the middle. Again, if you wanna use rivets instead of doing the X, you can do that. Alrighty, so this is how it should look when it's all done. Don't talk to me if it doesn't look straight, okay? It will look fine in the end. It always does. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna repeat that exactly with the other side. So the exact same thing, I'm gonna do that off camera and then I'll meet you back. All right, once you're all done, this is what the top should look like. Make sure the D-rings are up by the top here. They should look just like that. And then your gusset is nice and long. Now we are done with the gusset. So now you can start with the front or the back panel. I'm gonna start with the front panel, lay your front exterior panel right side up, and then lay your gusset right side down. And if you don't have the midpoint marked on the bottom edge of your front panel, make sure you have that marked before we go forward. So I'm gonna mark mine real quick. I'm gonna mark the top too. So mark the bottom and top midpoints on your front and back panels. And then lay your gusset right side down, right sides together with that front panel. Line up the midpoint mark on the bottom of the gusset with the midpoint mark on the bottom of your front panel. And the midpoint on the bottom of your gusset is just the seam between the two bottom gusset panels. So start there and then take the top left corner of your gusset and line it up with the top left corner of your main panel and clip these right sides together. And then do the same thing with the right corners. And then just go along the straight sides, clipping the gusset right sides together with the front panel. Just go as far as you can until you get to those curves. The curves are a little tricky, so we're gonna flip this over so we're looking at the back of the front panel. And we're gonna tuck in the front panel, kind of like a bowl, into the gusset. And you should notice that it does crinkle up on itself. It's a tight fit, but it gives it a really good look. So just clip as much as you can, and then we'll worry about spreading out that gusset. Try to just evenly distribute those little waves of material. This is gonna be, you know, and if you used foam like I did, you're gonna notice you're gonna have to spread it out quite a bit. All right, now I'm gonna grab my scissors and I'm gonna clip into the gusset. So not the front panel, not the main panel, the gusset panel. I'm just making little clips into the edge, and I'll probably have to make them a little deeper at the machine. But this is gonna allow the gusset to spread around those corners so that it gets nice and smooth. So it's kind of like making, it's like fake making the gusset longer without making the gusset longer. So do this with the other corner as well. Now lay your panel so it's gusset back side up, front panel right side up. And we're gonna sew along the sides and the curves in the bottom at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're gonna go slow, use a stiletto to hold it in place. Have a pair of scissors next to you at the sewing machine. And if you need to cut into the gusset because the gusset's just pulling away from the main panel and it will not spread, you can cut little slits into the gusset so that it can easily spread around those corners. Go slow here, that's the biggest tip. And again, gusset back side up, back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have it sewn on, just do a little peek at the corners. And if you have any like rippling or pleating or anything like that, you can always unpick that area and then restitch it. But honestly, you should not have a problem. So now I'm going to trim down the top corners once again at a 45-degree angle. And then I'm going to just trim the whole seam allowance in half so it's not so bulky. If you're using really thick material here, like a thick vinyl or something, you might want to do a second row of stitching just outside of that first round of stitching you did to reinforce it. Because when you turn this out, the exterior pushes against those stitches so much that you might end up seeing the thread from the stitches. And if you do a second row of stitching, you won't see them. It'll help reinforce it. So now grab the exterior back piece and lay it right side up. And then grab your unit with the gusset and lay it so the gusset is once again right side down. Match up the midpoints on the bottom, so the midpoint of the gusset with the midpoint of the back panel. And start there, clipping together, right sides together. And then match up the top corners, just like we did with the front panel. This is all a little bit harder because now you have like half of a bag that's fighting against you while you do this, so just take your time. And I'm gonna flip this over to make it easier. And then I like to do clips on all the straight edges first and save the curves for last. And just like I did before, I'm just gonna make little cuts into my gusset so that it can spread around some of these corners. And you might notice that like one corner it needs to spread more than the other. I don't know why that is, but it happens. There's some sort of science behind it. All right, just like we did with the other side, we're gonna flip this so we're looking at the wrong side of the front panel and the wrong side of the gusset, and we're gonna sew along the clipped edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. I like to use a zipper foot when sewing the gusset on. I feel like it just allows me to get closer to those corners without fighting it too much. And I do suggest using a stiletto and just go slow. Alrighty, there you go. And to me, that's the hardest part. When we do this for the lining, it's a lot easier because it doesn't have to be as perfect. So I'm cutting down the corners just like I did before, and I'm gonna go around and trim that seam in half. Okay, so the pattern says to flip it right side out. That's what I'm gonna do. Oh yeah, that's looking really good. And I really like that we use the foam on the exterior, front and back. I think that looks really good. And that's gonna make the bag very structured. So we can set this to the side now. So now let's work on the lining. You're gonna grab your lining interior pocket panel, and we're gonna make this just like we did the zipper pocket on the flap, except it's gonna be up and down versus side to side. So once again, I'm just folding this long lining zipper pocket panel in half, getting a good crease there, and then I'm also going to clip onto the sides to mark the midpoints of this long pocket piece. And then I'm going to open up this piece, and I'm looking at the wrong side, and I just went ahead and marked a line connecting those two midpoint marks. It's just easier for me to visualize. And just like before, I'm going to mark a midpoint on this drawn line. So it's the very midpoint of the entire panel. And that's easy to do by just folding it in half and marking on the fold with your pen. And then just like we did on the flap, I measured 1/2 inch to the right or 1/2 inch to the bottom of this midpoint mark here. And then I drew a 7" by 1/2 inch rectangle, just like we did before. So measure down a 1/2 inch and then do a 7" by 1/2 inch box. Now you can refold this along that fold you started with, because we're going to use that fold for placement. And now grab one of your lining main panels and make sure you have the midpoint marked on the top and the bottom. And we're going to measure 3 inches down from the top midpoint, and we're going to center our pocket so that the fold is 3 inches down and centered. So if you need to mark on your lining pocket panel here the midpoint, go ahead and do that. This is not going to be seen in the end, so you can really mark it with whatever you like. Just any sort of fabric marking tool. All right, once I know that that's 3 inches down from the top edge, I'm going to open up that lining panel, grab some tape, tape the sides down so it does not move around on me, even though it most likely will. But I'm doing my best here. And just try to make sure it looks straight. I mean, mine looks straight, right? It doesn't look too crooked or anything, right? I don't know. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew right over that rectangle. So this is connecting the lining pocket piece with the lining main panel, and I like to go at like a 2mm stitch length. Make sure the needle makes it into every single corner, and just take your time. I do backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that stitched in place, you're going to draw your midpoint line going right down the center of that window, and then draw your diagonal lines to meet up with that midpoint. My triangles go in by about 1/2 inch. I don't really measure it, but you don't want them to be too short, because then you won't be able to catch them when you're sewing it down. So I would suggest a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to grab my seam ripper now, and I'm going to rip through the lining pocket and the lining main panel. And then I'm going to just cut along that midpoint line until I get to the tip of the triangle. And once again, I'm just going to cut along the diagonal all the way to the very corner of those stitches. Like, my scissors are touching the stitches, but I'm not cutting the stitches. I hope that makes sense, but that's like how close you got to get those corners to line up nicely. Okay, now push your pocket panel through the hole. So the lining is all now wrong sides together. And this just can take a little bit of time. For this, if you want to grab an iron and press this, that's probably going to be really helpful. When it's just water-resistant canvas, it's easy to press. Okay, once you have this opening straight and flat in the way you want it, grab your other zipper, and if you haven't already added the zipper pull, go ahead and put the zipper pull on that zipper. And if you haven't already, clean up those raw edges. Look at that cut. I did a very bad job cutting the zipper. Once again, we're going to add double-sided tape to the very edge of both long edges of our zipper tape. Okay, with the zipper closing towards the left. So when the zipper pull is closing the zipper, it's moving towards the left. We're going to lay the zipper right side up. Remove the paper from the top edge of your zipper tape. Take your window with the lining right side up, center it over your zipper. Make sure the sides are lined up. You don't want the zipper tape to be too short on one side and end up popping out. And then just carefully tape this down, centering the teeth in the window. And we're just doing this one side at a time. So you're only focusing on taping down the top edge right now. So I lift it up and retape it, a dozen times. Okay, once you're happy with that, lift up all your lining material, move the zipper pull out of the way, take the paper off of the bottom zipper tape, and then fold all your lining material back down. And then just like we did on the top, just kind of manipulate this. Remember, this is a lining pocket, so good enough is good enough. All right, once you're happy with that, we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along all the edges outside of this little rectangle at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have this stitched in place, you're gonna flip this over, bring that top piece of the lining down to meet the bottom edge of your pocket. Line up those short edges of the lining zipper pocket, and I like to fold both of them up together by about 1/2 of an inch and clip. So right now I'm just focusing on the short edges, folding them both up and clipping. We're gonna turn the bag through this hole in the bottom and in the end. So once I have the bottom edge clipped, now I'm gonna work on the sides here, and I'm clipping the two sides of the lining pocket together. So I'm not clipping the lining main panel to anything right now. So you pull the zipper up because we're gonna clip the zipper too. There we go. So do this for both sides of this lining pocket, and you can see you need to pull up the zipper as well. So here's the zipper, pull that up as well in your clips. So once you have that all clipped, you can take your lining main panel and lay it right side up, and you're gonna fold the main panel out of the way, and we're just gonna sew along the two sides. So not the bottom edge is gonna stay unsewn. But the two sides we're going to sew along at about 1/4 to 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch the beginning and the end, especially on the bottom really well, and make sure this folded edge of the bottom stays folded. Don't unfold it. I like to use a zipper foot for this so I can get nice and close to the edge of the zipper panel. All right, this lining panel is now done. You can set it to the side. So now take your electronics pocket, if you're using that, and your electronics foam. If you don't want to make it an electronics pocket, you can just leave the foam off and just make it a big slip pocket. It's totally up to you. But you're going to take your pocket and you're going to fold it in half, short sides together, wrong sides together. And then just give it a nice fold on the top. If you want to press that fold, go ahead and do that. Then what you want to do is take your foam, if you're using it, and just slide it into that fold and make sure it's centered. I'm just kind of eyeballing it on the sides over here, so on the left and right sides. And you're just going to wrap this top edge around the foam, bring it back down, and line up all the edges again. Now, I'll be honest, it is kind of tricky to catch the top edge of the foam in that fold. So if you don't catch it, that's okay. Do your best, but I'm just going to kind of push the foam up into that fold as best I can. There we go. And add clips to hold it in place. So now I'm going to take this sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along this top clipped folded edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. I feel like that has a better chance of catching the foam rather than 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Now grab your remaining lining main body panel and lay it right side up, and then take your little slip pocket and lay it right side up and line it up with the bottom edge and the side edges of your main body lining panel. And you'll notice that the main body has curved corners and this one does not. That's okay. Just clip the sides and the bottom together. So now I'm going to flip this so I'm looking at the wrong side of the lining panel because that allows me to see the curved corners down here, and we're just gonna baste along the sides and the corners and the bottom edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, holding that pocket in place. Once you have that basted in place, flip this over so you're looking at the back of the lining panel, and then just cut the corners off of the slip pocket so that they are rounded just like the lining panel. So now I measured down 2 inches from the top edge of my lining pocket, and I centered my bra tag here, and I just used some double-sided tape to hold it down. And now I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and just top stitch along all 4 edges of my tag to hold it in place. Okay, so now we're gonna build the lining gusset, which is very simple. So you're gonna take your lining bottom gusset panel, lay it right side up. Take your 2 lining top gusset panels and lay them right sides down, lining up their short edges with the short edge on the bottom gusset. Remember, these are right sides together. And just grab some clips and clip each of these short edges together on the left and the right. And now I'll take this to the sewing machine and just stitch along both of these short edges at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance, making sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have these stitched in place, press the top lining gusset up so that the seam is behind it. So on each side, the seam should be behind the top lining gusset panel. And then we're gonna take this to the sewing machine, and we're just gonna top stitch right along the top lining gusset panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold that seam in place behind it. So now your lining gusset is done. If you haven't already, let's mark the midpoint on the bottom of our gusset on both sides. You're gonna need both those midpoints marked. So now we're gonna put together the lining panel just like we did with the exterior. So we can start with the zipper pocket lining panel, lay that right side up, grab your gusset lining panel and lay your gusset right side down so it's right sides together with the main lining panel. And line up the midpoint marks on the bottom first and clip together. And then pull your top left corner of your gusset up to the top left corner of your lining panel and clip the corners together. And then do the same over here on the right. And then clip along the straight edges. And then once you get to those rounded corners, once again, just tuck them in kind of like a bowl. And you probably will notice that the corners are rippling a bit, like little waves. That's totally normal. Also, with the lining, you don't have to be as concerned about it because it doesn't ever get turned out. So the lining stays the way we're sewing it right now. So it never gets turned out and you never really see any pleating. So if you end up with a little bit of a pinch here and there, it's not noticeable, but I'm still gonna show you how to try to prevent it. All right, now we're gonna go back to those corners and I'm going to cut slits about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge all around those corners. And this is just gonna allow the gusset to spread, but also make sure you have your scissors at your sewing machine so you can make more cuts if you need to while you sew. So now we're gonna flip this so it's gusset lining wrong side up, and we're going to sew along the edges. Now we're gonna start at the top over here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch. Once you get about 1 inch down, you can increase your seam allowance to a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Continue around the side, the bottom corners, the bottom, and then back up the other side at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then once you get about 1 inch away from the other side top edge, you're going to decrease it down to a 1/2 inch seam allowance and backstitch. So you want a bigger seam allowance for most of the bag, but the very top of the bag has to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance so it'll match up with the exterior. All right, once you have that sewn, you can clip down the corners like normal, and then just trim the seam allowance down to a 1/4 of an inch. Make sure you don't accidentally cut the zipper pocket or anything like that. Keep that out of the way. All right, once you have one side done, we're gonna repeat that with the other lining panel. So I have my tech pocket here, right side up. I'm gonna take my gusset and lay it right side down, match up the midpoints on the bottom edge here, and then match up the top corners, and then just clip along the straight edges. And then we can flip this over and once again, just tuck in those rounded corners, and then you can clip into the gusset so that it can spread around those corners. Now once again, lay this so that the lining is wrong side up, and we're going to stitch along the edge. At the top, we're gonna stitch at a 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end, But then on the sides and the bottom, we're gonna stitch at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Go slow, take your time, and also remember the lining doesn't need to be perfect. So if you get a little bit of pleating on those corners, it's totally fine. So once that's sewn on, trim down the top corners. And the reason we trim down these top corners is because it gets very bulky up there in the end, especially when we have to top stitch. So we wanna make it as not bulky as possible. And then we're gonna trim down the seam allowance of our lining to 1/4 inch. I don't measure it. I just give it a little eyeball. No one's gonna see, no one's gonna judge. So you just don't want a bunch of this bulk pushing against inside the bag because it takes up space. Okay, set the lining to the side for just a moment. So now we need to attach the flap to the bag. And so I suggest you mark the midpoint along the top straight edge of your flap if you haven't already. And then lay your bag so you have the back panel right side up. So this is the back panel. The back panel does not have the snap, okay? Take your flap and lay your flap right side down so it's right sides together with the back panel, and then line it up with that midpoint mark on the top and clip along the top edge. And it should be just about the same size. It should not pass the seam on the side. So it should really be just like a perfect fit on this back panel after the back panel has already been sewn into the gusset. So mine, it comes right up to the seam. It's just like a perfect fit. So now we're gonna just go base this flap down at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm gonna back stitch at the beginning and the end just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. All right, so just double check when you close your flap over the top, it's gonna go like this and it's gonna match up with the magnet on the front, okay? If you're like, wait a minute, the magnet's back here on the back, then you attached it to the wrong place, remove the flap and redo it. So now flip your bag so it is wrong side out, and then flip your lining so it is right side out. So they're complete opposites right now from how they will be in the end. Now make sure your zipper pocket in your lining is open. Everything is coming through that hole, so you need to make sure it's open. Now take your lining and you're gonna insert it into your exterior. The tech pocket is going to be on the same side as the flap. So this back panel here has the flap. The tech pocket is going to slide right inside and go against the flap. So now using the midpoint marks on the top edge of your exterior and your lining, let's start clipping these together, okay? So just go around, and I like to clip the midpoints first. And it does get bulky where that flap is, so you need to be careful with your material here. If you have the box, you should be fine. This, again, is an intermediate make, but you shouldn't have any issues with thickness. And then we're gonna go over here to the sides where the gusset are, and we're gonna match up the seams. So that's very important that the gusset seams from the lining and the exterior match up, okay? Don't let them be in other places. So there's 2 seams on each side because the gusset has 2 seams. So just match those up. And if you clip down your corners like I did, you really shouldn't have to worry too much about seam allowances pushing one way or another or opening them or anything like that. We'll deal with that when it's time to top stitch. So repeat for the other side with the gusset. All right, once you have this all clipped, we're gonna go around this entire top edge and we're gonna sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end, and then do a second row of stitching only along the back panel where the flap is, and you can feel it because it's quite a bit thicker. Do a second row of stitching along that back panel at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, also back stitching at the beginning and the end of that one. That's just gonna help reinforce the back panel because that flap is what's gonna be pulled on the most. Okay, I'll be honest, my arm is killing me. It can be a little tricky, but now you're done. I would say it's the hardest part. I would honestly, top stitching is a little bit tricky, but that's okay. So now we're just gonna pull the bag through the lining, through that zipper pocket that we left open, and the bottom is unsewn. And I forgot to mention this, but I'm gonna do it. Even though it's kind of a mess right now. I need to trim the seam allowance along the top down, except where the back panel. So here's the back panel here where I did my second row of stitching. I'm not gonna trim that down, but the rest of it, I'm gonna trim it in half to a 1/4 inch. I just completely forgot. So I'm gonna go around carefully. So this is the front panel and the side gussets. That's it. The back panel is not getting trimmed down. Just carefully trimming it down in half. And then once I get to the back panel, I'll just veer it off. There we go. All right, I know. It's gonna be kind of messy. It's a big bag and it went through a fairly small hole, so it's gonna be a little messy. But what I wanna do is I'm trying to get my exterior the way I want it, and then I'm just gonna tuck my lining into the bag. And I'm not closing that lining hole until the very end. So now what we wanna do is we wanna top stitch along the top seam here. And I know, that's always the hardest part of bags like this. But you got this. So I'm going to roll out the seam and straighten it out, kind of like I did when I did the flap. I'm just going to roll it out the way I want it and then use clips to hold it in place. Depending on your material, you might want to use an iron to iron this down. It's not going to be that hard except for the seams. The seams are where it's the most challenging. So that's where you might want to reach into the hole that's in that zipper pocket. And if you need to kind of like butterfly out the seam, press the seams in opposite directions, do whatever you can to make it less bulky, go ahead and do that. Okay, and then when you come to the back panel, obviously you can't clip it, so you're just going to kind of push down the lining as far as you can get it to flatten it out, because when you're top stitching, you might not be able to see it. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to wrap this around the bottom of my sewing machine. So I'm going to take the table off and wrap this around my arm of my sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along the entire top edge slowly and carefully at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end, go very slow over these bulky seams on the gusset. I know you got to be careful there. Just do your best. And if you need to, like I said, if you need to press open the seams or trim them down, you still have that opening in your zipper pocket. You can do that. Just be careful. Okay, that wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad. I love this bag. It's so pretty, isn't it? It's just such a nice neutral bag, but honestly, as like a military kid, this has a very military like look to it. I don't know if you have somebody in your life who has like military experience or something, or going into the military, this would be a really, it just reminds me of it. It's very cool, very cool. Okay, so now we're gonna close the hole in the lining. So pull out that zipper lining pocket. It still has that hole there. And since we folded that edge when we sewed it, you should be able to just kind of put your fingers in the hole where the seams are and give it a tug. And the raw edges just fold in on themselves. So we're going to clip along that folded edge. And now I'm going to top stitch right along this clipped edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Alrighty, once you have that closed up, just tuck in that zipper lining pocket. And then just make sure you tuck in all your lining. Get the inside the way you like it, because your bag is now done. And if you have a lot of wrinklies here, you can iron this. So this is water resistant canvas. You can just run an iron over this and it'll get all the wrinklies out. If you have any wrinklies on your nylon part, cover it with some quilt cotton. So grab a scrap piece of cotton woven material, put that over there, nothing sticky or anything like that, just woven quilt cotton material. Cover it, iron over the quilt cotton, and it'll get all the wrinkles out. But if you didn't use the sticky stabilizer on the nylon, you really shouldn't have any wrinkles. So let's set this to the side and work on the strap. So we're gonna make our strap just like we normally do, but we're gonna sew it. We're not gonna use rivets. And I'm actually okay with that. If you've been around the channel for a while, you know I almost always use rivets when I make a strap. But I've been practicing and I'm okay with the sewing. So we're gonna take one end of our strap and we're gonna thread it up through the bottom of our slider. And if you have a slider in the box, there is no bottom and top, it's whatever you want it to be. Go up and over that middle bar, just like that. I'm gonna have it overhang by about 1.5 inches, and then I'm just gonna fold it in on itself. So I'm tucking that raw edge in. So I have it, I mean, like I probably have it folded over by 1 inch, maybe 2-inch overhang. Eyeball it, honestly. So now I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm just going to top stitch a little rectangle right over this folded over edge of my webbing. No X or anything, just a top stitch rectangle around as close to the bar as I can get it, and then 1/8 of an inch from the edges. Once you have the slider top stitch in place, you're going to keep your webbing nice and straight with the folded over edge on top, just like this. Webbing straight. Go to the end of your webbing and thread your swivel hook on so the swivel is facing down, and then keep it straight, fold your webbing in half so the raw edge comes up against the folded over edge. Go up from the bottom of your slider, up and over that top middle bar and down the other end, just like this. So this is what it should look like. You have your swivel hook just threaded on the webbing. You have your slider in the middle, stitched in place, and then you have your raw edge over here. I'm gonna go ahead and just melt down these little frays here. With the slider facing right side up, take your remaining swivel hook, and with the swivel facing right side up, you're gonna thread it onto that end of your webbing. Fold the webbing down by about 1 inch, fold it again by about 1 inch. I'm not measuring. Just fold it over enough so that you can easily sew this down. So just like we did with the slider, I'm just gonna top stitch a little rectangle all around this folded over end of my webbing to hold it in place. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. So funny, do you guys see? Look how wonky that little rectangle is. It's like a little tiny house or something. If you purchase this bag from me, just know it's a little wonky. They always are. The strap is now done, so I'm just gonna add it to the bag. Take a final look. I love this bag. And this is just one of those bags. You can gift it to anyone. For everybody who's been asking for a bag for the men in their life, I think this is a good option. I hope you love making it. All right, guys, this looks exactly the same as the one I made previously. However, it was easier to do because of the modifications we made, and I think I do like a little bit of the stabilizer changes. So here's the first bag I made. This is the first one I made. Big difference between this one and this one over here is the front pocket on the flap. On this one over here on my right, we did not put the firmer stabilizer, that sticky fleece stabilizer. We didn't put it on the exterior, we put it on the lining instead, which made construction a lot easier, and we still have that nice stability. I really like that I decided to use the foam on the front and back panels. So I did not use the foam on this first bag here. So let me show you. This is the first one. You see the front panel here, how it kind of like droops down a little bit. It doesn't have any sort of stabilizer there. It's just the waterproof canvas in the nylon, which does offer a good amount of stability. So again, you don't need to use stabilizer when you use material like that. But this one over here that I'm holding right here, this one you can see it's a lot more structured, and it's because we have that foam. And the foam was not difficult to sew over at all. Like top stitching the top was easy. I'm using a domestic machine, so as I say, if I can do it, you can do it. These bags are so pretty. Oh my gosh, maybe I'll keep the other one and Derek and I can be little twinsies. So I hope you enjoyed sewing with me today. If you've already made one of these bags, let me know, because there's a lot of fun you can have with it. I mean, you know me, like this bag is beautiful, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, I want to do neon. I want neon nylon, neon vinyl, and I want every single panel to be a different color. I really think you could have fun with the exterior gusset here because you have 4 panels on the exterior gusset. So I think color blocking that in some really bright colors might be really cool. And so I kind of want to try it. Hopefully I'll be able to make another one, because I do have, oh man, this would be such a fun summer bag in the neons. I gotta do it now because it's in my head. I did not show it on in the beginning of the video. I guess I can do that real quick. I'm gonna try to stay on my tippy toes. Oh, can you guys see it? You can barely see it. I'm 5 feet 4 inches, so a little bit short, and a size small or medium depending on the day. And this is how it hangs on me. Let me do it as a crossbody, see if it works better like that. So you can see, very cool, very traditional, very flattering shape. It's gonna look good on everybody. It's gonna look good on me. It's gonna look good on my husband. It's gonna look good on my mom, on my kids, everybody. College Jessica, me, when I was many years younger and in university, I would have wore this bag every single day. I think I had a bag that looks almost identical to this. So this would have definitely been my go-to college bag. So again, if you have a college student in your life, they can be a little tricky to make things for, this is a great option. So I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.